Story 1. My parents. My father was a sexual predator and pedophile, with a terrible temper and full of hate. My mother was one of his victims. She sexualized me in infancy, then abandoned the family when he lost his health, job, and money. She also lent me out to her friends until my teenage years. He killed himself. She is still around somewhere. Fuckers. Story 2. My ex-manager refused to release my final pay even after I served my full notice period and completed every handover properly. Weeks turned into months. I filed a case, genuinely believing that if you did everything by the book, the system would be fair. The company had good relations with him, so nothing happened. What made it worse was knowing where it started. Months earlier, I had politely pointed out a small error in his work. Nothing disrespectful, just something that could have caused a problem later. After that, things quietly changed. My work was suddenly over-examined and minor mistakes were highlighted. Story 3. My sister's ex-husband nearly killed me while trying to rape me when I was 15 in 1971. I was babysitting for them at the time. They were supposed to be out in different places, but he was hiding in the house waiting for my sister to leave. I was saved because I somehow managed to scream even though he was holding my mouth closed. I do not know how I managed that. The next door neighbor kicked the door in, and I owe my life to him. The police were called. My sister begged me to drop the charges, saying he was all she and her daughter had. He told the police I was asking for it and that I was easy. I was simply friendly and trusting. Story 4. My father was a sexual predator who abused me for years. My mother knew but turned a blind eye. When I was 13, I went to the school counselor and reported him. My two brothers turned against me and have been misogynistic bullies ever since. One of them had always been a bully. I cut them all off. I am 63 and I still live with this. They were evil people. Story 5. My grandmother was worried that my mother had died from cancer. She beat it. Story 6. I met a man in a bar once and immediately got a terrible vibe from him. I felt like a cat with my hackles up. 9 months after I met him, he murdered his girlfriend and then killed himself. It turned out his girlfriend was a childhood friend of mine. I had no idea. Story 7. I am honestly not sure, but I wonder in whose story I am the worst person they have met. Story 8. My sister's ex-mother-in-law is the true definition of a narcissistic piece of shit. She physically attacked my sister one day, and my brother-in-law never did anything about it. She manipulated her sons into leaving their wives and, if they refused, made their lives miserable. My sister suffered terribly, and my brother-in-law always sided with his mother. I nearly fought the mother-in-law for disrespecting my sister and my family, and then I was labeled the problem and told to take anger management classes, gaslighting. She flew from her home country to New York City, then announced she was leaving and flew to Florida to stay with her youngest daughter. A few days later, she told her sons she needed to be back in New York City immediately, that she was terrified of flying again, and that they had to drive to Florida to pick her up. My brother-in-law and his older brother went into a frenzy trying to decide who would drive their mother back. My brother-in-law, who was not working at the time, told my sister his mother needed him and he had to go. My sister refused, and they had a huge argument. They had 2 young children then, a 6-year-old and a 1-year-old. My sister's commute was 45 minutes and the 6-year-old was at school. He put the 1-year-old in the car and called my sister from her job's parking lot, telling her to come outside to pick up their son because he was leaving to pick up his mother in Florida. My sister had a nervous breakdown, crying in the parking lot with a 1-year-old and an extremely busy job. Thankfully, her company supported her and allowed her to work from home until everything was sorted. He was gone for almost a week and came back acting as if nothing had happened and claiming he needed to save his mother. He is a good person, but he was always a terrible husband to my sister. The mother-in-law also ran up an emergency credit card that her daughter and son-in-law gave her, putting them $20,000 in credit card debt and refusing to pay a cent. They were already broke and struggling to pay bills and raise their kids. I have never hated anyone as much as I hate this woman. I cheered when my sister finally decided to divorce my brother-in-law. When the mother-in-law dies, I will be the first in line to tap dance on that bitch's grave. Story 9. My former employee was a parasite. He told colleagues he was going to the local skate park after work to leer at 14-year-old girls. I would not assist him and prefer to have no contact with him. Story 10. My landlord longtime friend is a slimy snake, and I feel he is taking advantage of an elderly man in his 80s. Sickening. Story 11. I was involved in a hobby a dozen years ago. I met a man who helped run things with his wife in a different chapter. He was slightly odd, but she was very nice. I was going to run an event one weekend where she had an important role when I got a call at work telling me she had been murdered while he was away at a friend's house. We canceled and rescheduled the event, and he came in her place to get out of the house. A month later, he was arrested and later convicted of shooting his wife. Prosecutors said he sneaked out of the friend's house, returned home at about 1 a.m., shot her in the eye, and then returned to the friend's house. They had been having marital problems, and one clue was that he had taken out a life insurance policy on her several months earlier. Coincidentally, a barn on his property had burned down a few months before that and had been insured. Story 12. One of my doctors told me not to be dramatic when I miscarried my baby. I was deeply upset. Story 13. I met a man in prison during a gift-giving visit. He had been sent there for keeping people as slaves. Story 14. A woman who raised me from ages 10 to 18 in the foster care system last beat me when I was 21, after I came out as gay. I am amazed that I survived. It frightened me so intensely that it took about 10 years of therapy for me to feel genuinely steady again. I still see echoes of it even now. Story 15. My stepmother was with my father and had a baby with him that they put up for adoption. They broke up and my father married my mother. She continually stalked and harassed my parents for years, calling my grandparents looking for my father and phoning my mother's best friends before hanging up. She stalked my mother at restaurants in Brooklyn in the 1980s. My mother had her arrested, and she disappeared temporarily. My father later had an affair with her. He says it occurred early in my parents' marriage and again when they separated. My parents were married for 20 years. He married her after the divorce in 2004. She has manipulated and isolated my father after his stroke in 2018 and regularly calls me and verbally abuses me. It is important to note that my father was also abusive my entire life and has no relationship with his children. I decided to go no contact with them finally on Christmas Eve 2025. I am 41, married with 2 children, and have no room for this in my life. My mother died in October 2024, yet my stepmother is still alive. Story 16. It is a tie between several of the most narcissistic, soulless assholes I have encountered over the years. There is nothing underneath, only opportunistic greediness for whatever they can take from you. Story 17. My ex tried to ruin my life. I was with her for 3 years. She gave me chlamydia and credit card debt. Story 18. I had to call the police on a used car salesman to get my friend's car back. It was a lemon, and when my friend tried to return it within the time limit, the salesman conned him into letting the dealership fix the issues. Our mechanic said that would not be possible. When my friend went back to get the car, the dealership would not tell him where it was. I confronted the salesman in person. He brought us into his office and sat us down. Then a large man came in and sat directly behind us. I outlined the con he was running and told him in clear terms to return the car so it could be declared a lemon. The salesman looked at me with snake eyes and lied through his teeth despite being caught. For 2 hours we went back and forth until I called the police and, when they arrived, reported the theft. I had never looked into the eyes of undisguised evil until that day. Story 19. I don't know if I could pick one worst person. A few faces definitely pop into my head, though. You know the type. Charming at first, then slowly draining the life out of the room. Story 20. My brother regularly beat me for no reason, belittled me, and abandoned both his sons. He intentionally antagonized a neighborhood child with developmental issues to make him angry. He also physically assaulted his first wife. He now has an online video channel with many followers, and I wish they knew the real him, although I agree with most of his content. Story 21. My former coworker was a low-key sociopath. He made fun of every customer behind their backs, started fights in bars, drove while blackout drunk, and eventually conspired to get me fired. Fuck you, Armin. Story 22. With my husband, it feels like there is no room for mistakes. I can't be myself. Story 23. It was probably someone I worked with who was charming in public and cruel in private. Watching them manipulate people while acting like the victim messed with my head for a long time. It taught me that being nice and being kind are very different things. Story 24. My ex-girlfriend was a drug addict, a manipulator, a thief, and mentally unstable. She was not easy on the eyes, but she was my best friend. She treated me like trash and called me names constantly. She would become extremely intoxicated, and I would have to pick up the pieces. She accused me of cheating and went through my phone. She scratched my face so badly that I had scars. I had to go to work and everyone knew it was her, not the lame story I had made up. She was living at home with her parents and her 30-year-old sister. She told me, which could have been a lie, that the older sister used to molest her when they were young, and that the father used to molest the older sister. I told her to go to therapy, but she never did, so I left her for a woman I met at work. Now I am engaged. Story 25. This guy beat me up in high school. Story 26. There was a girl who kept going after my boyfriends in high school. I had to end the friendship because it was weird. Story 27. My father's stepfather, a New York City police officer in the 1960s and 1970s, was almost certainly on the take. He was a horrible person to everyone around him and made my father into the terrible person he became. Of the people I know personally, he has the lowest ratio of lives made better to lives made worse. Story 28. I have not met many nefarious characters that I did not like, so I will pick a current teammate. I have no idea how he got a job alongside me. He is an ex-Marine who never stops talking about it. He writes at a 10th grade level despite having a college degree. He assumed I support Make America Great Again because of my gender and race and implied I am not capable of critical thinking. He works 20 hours a week and uses the worst Southern vocabulary I have ever heard. He embarrasses me on calls with incessant, useless comments, and he can never admit when he is wrong. I truly cannot find a single positive thing about this person. I hate that I worked my way into my dream job and have to share parts of my day with him. End of rant. Story 29. My ex. I know there are way worse people out there, but I had not met them and I did meet my ex. The moment we had children, he had a mental breakdown, became emotionally avoidant, and over the next decade he systematically ignored me, marginalized me, and almost destroyed my relationship with my children. The abject disdain he openly showed became abusive. I should have left sooner, but you do not expect a sweet, supportive, loving man to change like that. I thought he was depressed and would return to himself eventually. I did not realize the first man was a mask and the second was his true self. Story 30. My cousin's husband has been in jail since July 2025 for abusing patients in his care, aged 14 to 40. He also had terabytes of illegal material involving minors on his computer. Additionally, he left my cousin with a large amount of credit card debt because he failed to pay bills he was responsible for. Story 31. I have met a few people who could reasonably be called awful in one way or another, but the worst person I have ever met was a man I shared a cell with for a brief period in the 1990s. A very plain, unremarkable man. He told us how he befriended a widow and, while conning her out of money, learned she had a homemade Christmas pudding she had planned to share with her late husband of many years. It was entirely homemade, and she regularly topped it up with brandy, possibly as a private way of managing her grief. He said that, over several months, he badgered this old woman to let him have the pudding. She eventually gave in. He described, with some glee, how she cried as he ate it in front of her. He said it was the best Christmas pudding he had ever tasted. I have met people who deserve jail, but I have never met one, before or since, whom I would have happily pulled the lever to drop through the trapdoor. Story 32. Other than obvious family members, bullies, and strangers, the worst person I have ever met is George Barris, the man who made the first Batmobile. My dad and I met him at a convention. We loved Batman comics, movies, and TV shows. My father was an older man. He had been a teenager when the show for which Barris made the car came out. He fell in love with it after reading the comics for years. Fast forward about 40 years and we met him. Autographs on a headshot were $20. When we finally reached his table, my father told him how big of a fan we were and how much Batman meant to our family. The man laughed at my father and told him to grow up. Standing in front of the Batmobile, he then said that the picture and autograph specifically for us would now be $60. My dad told him to go away and we almost got kicked out of the convention when Barris began screaming at my father, doing the, "Who do you think you are?" "I am." Nonsense. We explained the price change to security. They stopped talking to us and immediately went to speak with him. We left after, both of us extremely upset. My father was a frail, small man with many health issues. It was one of the few times we had ever gone to a convention. I am nearly crying typing this. My father was tough as nails, but when we got home he cried and we never watched the Adam West Batman show again. Anytime I think of Batman, I think of this man making my father cry because the child in him died that day. I despise George Barris. Story 33. Fucking Alan. An angry, lonely grump of a man who would terrorize the office if he woke up in a bad mood, which was most days. He was extremely misogynistic, racist, and homophobic and would openly make horrible jokes all the time. He listened to YouTube videos and other stuff at full volume on his phone while we were trying to work. He would snap about the smallest things. He was eventually fired. Story 34. Probably the two masked junkie thieves who robbed me at gunpoint. Story 35. I was unknowingly acquainted with a prolific serial killer before his capture. That said, Jessica, using a fake last name, is by far the worst person I have ever known. Story 36. My stepdad abused my mom, my brother, and me. He literally broke my mom's arms and slammed my brother's head against our brick floor until it cracked. He threw me through a glass table once. He would get drunk and use cocaine, then lose his mind. He broke everything in the house. When I jumped out the window of my room to get away, he chased me in his car or on foot. He later lay on railroad tracks and killed himself. It was strange that my mom and brother were sad. I did not shed a tear. Story 37. My first professional boss was a terrible person. He was gray and miserable and liked to make everyone around him miserable. He is the only person I have worked with who openly used a racial slur, and his favorite target was another manager in a different group. People dreaded dealing with him. One woman had to seek therapy and medication. How he held a job for as long as he did is beyond me. The one takeaway from that experience was that I learned who I did not want to be. Story 38. My stepfather emotionally traumatized me for over 10 years. He left my mother and now abuses his new partner. More than 10 years after I last saw him, I still struggle with memories and trauma. Story 39. My most recent former partner broke up with me a few years ago. I will never date another man because of how horrifying he turned out to be. I know there are bad people in the world, but I had never had one so close to me. Story 40. This woman's name is Shauna. She is evil, manipulative, and the worst supervisor I have ever had. Story 41. My ex-mother-in-law believes women should be subservient to men. She is worse than my ex. She repeatedly shamed me for my weight, and her attitude that day influenced my decision to have an abortion and to break up with her son. He got another woman pregnant 6 months later. Story 42. Ex-wife number 2, the prolific herpes spreader of the 1970s and 1980s. Story 43. My former boss overworked me and always said it was never a good time to take a vacation. I wish her nothing but the worst. Story 44. One of my ex's brothers was a real piece of shit. He was a petty thief, a thug, a woman beater, and he is said to have touched his own sister. He was always in and out of jail. He tried to get violent with me, but I had backup. Story 45. I'm tempted to say my ex, but a newly married former coworker murdered his pregnant girlfriend. He is much worse. Story 46. I had the displeasure of working with a former maintenance supervisor when I was a student maintenance worker at my university. He was the biggest douchebag and piece of shit I have ever met. He regularly talked badly about and made fun of those he thought were beneath him, both to their faces and behind their backs. He made racist comments and used a racial slur when referring to his children, even though they are both white. He also sexually harassed student workers by showing them pornographic bloopers or by hitting on female student workers. To make matters worse, there was nothing we could do because he was the boss's favorite. Thankfully, karma has a way of catching up. He was eventually fired after the university head maintenance manager discovered he was parking his scooter and his belongings in an off-limits area. Later, the youth wrestling club that he presided over discovered he had been using the club's bank account for personal expenses and had stolen roughly $19,000. Last I heard, he was sent to prison for a few years. Fuck you, Chad. Story 47. As a young journalist, I crossed paths with Ian Watkins, Not the Step singer, and Oscar Pistorius within a few months of each other in 2012. Story 48. I met many representatives and senators during 8 years working on Capitol Hill. We handled chemical, biological, radiological, nuclear, and explosive detection and protection for the Capitol and other congressional office buildings. Most were pleasant. Some were not, and some were arrogant. Staffers were the worst. Some had an off-camera presence that differed from their public persona. For example, Barney Frank acted belligerent on camera but was very nice off-camera. Senator Daniel Inouye was an amazing person. I enjoyed chatting with him the few times I could. Carl Levin, Steny Hoyer, John McCain, and Debbie Stabenow were all pleasant, and Bob Dole was a polite gentleman. The worst person I ever met in real life was Nancy Pelosi. Have you ever had your skin crawl as if you were in the presence of evil? I did. I will not go into detail, but I was legitimately unnerved by her. I am fairly certain that if I angered her, there was a small but very real chance she would metaphorically devour my soul. Story 49. When you say worst, I want to say evil, but what comes to mind are people who victimize themselves and drain everyone around them. The worst part is they sometimes have children, and my heart hurts for those kids. Story 50. I had a friend in college who slept with the girlfriends of his friends. He said it proved he was more desirable than his friends and that he was not attracted to women who were single. Story 51. I met a general from Myanmar who later committed genocide. I was in 4th grade and was kicked in the groin by his granddaughter, so I hit her in the face. When asked if I would do it again, I said yes. He took us to eat steak. I still have no idea why. The girl and I were kids, so I apologized half-heartedly. The scary part is that I have no memory of him being evil or mean. He was just a weird but chill old man. Story 52. My former manager at Imo's Pizza in St. Louis, Michael Devlin, was a real creep who was later discovered to have kidnapped and sexually abused a young boy. He held the boy for 5 years and was caught after abducting a second boy. I no longer worked there when this happened, but I had worked with him for several years. Although I found him arrogant and extremely annoying, I would not have expected him to be capable of those crimes. Story 53. Ted Cruz went to the same high school I did and ran for president in 2016. What an asshole. Story 54. My old church's pastor's son and his ex-wife behaved terribly. He would come to church intoxicated, yell racial slurs, and regularly joke about killing disabled people when adults were not around. He told me once that girls were easy to manipulate and that if his good looks were not enough to get him laid all the time, he would be so good at making girls have sex with him. His family is extremely wealthy. His father leads a megachurch, and he constantly boasts about how rich his father is. He demanded attention by acting out and engaging in attention-seeking behavior such as tipping over trash cans and provoking people. He once joked, "I would drown my baby if it looked like that," referring to a recently born child. He married his now ex-wife at 19. They both cheated on each other multiple times, divorced after 5 or 6 years, and I have heard rumors that they are still seeing each other. His ex-wife has repeatedly said, and I quote for clarity, "Black people are ugly as hell, and black people act like monkeys everywhere they go. No wonder they get hate. We are supposed to give them a whole month." This referred to an African-American family member in the church who died and to the church recognizing a month in their memory. Story 55. A so-called friend. During high school, he would rope me into his shenanigans without my knowing, such as having me carry his backpack when he had a gun inside because he was trying to sell it. After I graduated, we fought because he thought I was trying to hit on his girlfriend. At the time he had 3 children with her and he was known to be a thief and a cocaine addict. He would steal their things to sell, for example their digital versatile disc player. I had long since forgotten about him after that fight. Surprisingly, even though his parents and my ex, who was his sister, passed away, he is still alive and has never changed. Story 56. A classmate and coworker who later murdered a young man for a small amount of money. Aside from him, no one else really stands out. Story 57. At my first job, a coworker raped another employee and she became pregnant. The victim had a learning disability. Half the store covered for him by lying to customers about what happened. Story 58. My mother-in-law, hands down. I could list the things I have witnessed myself and that would be bad enough. But what I have heard about my partner's childhood, which I may know 2 to 10% of after 23 years together, has given me such vicarious trauma that I cannot be in her presence. I fear I might kill her or do something equally uncivil, so I feign a headache to avoid being around her. Honestly, I am surprised my partner is not a serial killer given that abusive upbringing. Story 59. My former boss hit my car in the workplace parking lot and took off. She did not tell me, and I only found out it was her because of the video recording. When I confronted her, she refused to accept it even with the evidence. She did not want to pay for the $3,000 in repairs, so I told her I would report it as a hit and run. I quit after that. For your information, she is an attorney. Story 60. It was probably the police officer at my high school who impregnated a 16-year-old student and paid for her abortion to keep it quiet. The matter did not remain quiet. Story 61. My teenage daughter's father started using drugs when she was a newborn, chose drugs over her, moved to another province, and has not seen her in 9 years. He was imprisoned for murder after drug dealings went wrong. I am lucky to have a wonderful husband who has become her father in every way, but she has been severely affected by her biological father. Story 62. I went on a couple of dates with a woman who was high up in finance at Electronic Arts. Her thoughts on loot boxes, getting kids hooked on gambling, and life in general were pretty Machiavellian. Story 63. My ex-husband turned out to have psychopathic traits. I moved 800 miles away and had no contact with him. Then I met Ted Bundy. They seem so nice and harmless. They never look crazy until they go there. Story 64. I attended the Royal Canadian Mounted Police Training Depot in Regina. Some of the worst people I have met became cadets and later became constables. Story 65. I had the bully from hell. His dad was in prison for double murder. Nobody ever disciplined him in school because they felt sorry for him and said he was a good kid. But I had seen his ugly side. He went on to kill a classmate in a fistfight. Story 66. My mother. I am not sure why she brought me into this world, then spent the rest of her life trying to ruin me. She is 82. Tick-tock. Story 67. My sperm donor. Among many other incidents, he put a cigar out on my hip. Story 68. Not the worst, but he was the first person who came to mind. He is from our town and is the kind of person who will go to a bar alone and latch onto other groups. That is not a major problem. There's nothing wrong with trying to make friends. But he does nothing but badmouth everyone. He makes fun of anyone who walks into the bar, and his banter is insulting and mean. A truly unpleasant person. Story 69. A tie between my birth father and my older sister. My birth father is a predator and pedophile. He preyed on his girlfriend's daughter and on his children's older sister. My mother gave birth to my sister when she was a teenager. He reportedly drugged my mother during and after her pregnancy. Thankfully, my mother got help for postpartum depression after my birth and left him. He threatened to take us from her and never cared for any of his 5 children. I am the youngest. I learned many things in my teens. My older sister began bullying me when I was about 7, escalating to physical abuse. She burned me with a curling iron and punched me in the stomach. My mother did nothing. She also assaulted my younger sister when my younger sister was 11 and the older sister was 24. She has threatened to kill each of us multiple times. She still communicates with my birth father despite knowing what he did. Story 70. Ugh. I worked with a Big Brother producer. He was a fat cocaine user who paid for sex and smelled too clean for how he looked. That show is demented, and the producers are closeted porn show wannabes. Story 71. I walked past Jeffrey Epstein on Madison Avenue years ago, before his awfulness became public. We just knew him as a rich guy who dated models, which describes half of New York. It was about noon on a bright, sunny day, surrounded by people. He turned and smiled at me, and I'm not kidding. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, and I thought, get the hell out of there. Keep moving. I brushed past him, probably a 4-second interaction, but I never forgot it. There is evil in this world, and the devil. I can't imagine how people could go to dinners at his townhouse and hang out with him. I read that Melinda Gates met him very briefly and divorced Bill Gates shortly thereafter. Maybe only women picked up on the vibe? Story 72. Many people come to mind, but the person who raped me is definitely among them. He raped me after I opened up to him about a recent health scare involving my ovaries. He waited until I was asleep after a night I thought was lovemaking. After calling me beautiful multiple times and having a relaxed conversation with me before I went to sleep, he said, "If you feel me on top of you throughout the night, just push me off. The rest is history." He acted like a victim when I confronted him about it, saying I started it by touching his shoulder. I struggle with severe depression and post-traumatic stress disorder now, almost a year later. Story 73. A guy I went to school with, let us say, was found to have some pictures on his laptop. Story 74. The girl who bullied me in junior high had been my friend before she made up rumors about me. She created a group chat to insult me and faked my chat history to damage my friendships. Story 75. I have not seen or spoken to my father in ages. I am not sure he is still alive, and I do not care. Story 76. She was the head of information technology at a former client where I worked as an external service provider. Every morning she greeted employees but ignored external service providers. She never addressed me directly and criticized my work behind my back. Story 77. About my boss. I started a new job to get out of a toxic work environment and was looking forward to a fresh start and better work-life balance. She started 2 weeks after me. I was optimistic because we were both new and I could see how she operated. I did not have an issue with the management change like my coworkers who had been there for years, and I thought it would be a better environment. Instead, she's mean, rude, condescending, and the biggest micromanager I have ever met. She told everyone I was the most inefficient in my role, among other things. Almost regretting leaving my previous job because of her is the most discouraging feeling, especially since I was so excited for a fresh start. Story 78. I was probably lucky not to have known how despicable someone was. Story 79. I know the ringleader of a group of young adults who murdered a family at a rest stop just for fun. Story 80. The cult leader manipulated my father, made him divorce my mother, and forced him to marry one of his foreign-born followers so she could obtain a permanent resident card. He is also charged with multiple counts of sexual assault and faces civil lawsuits related to spousal support payments stemming from his alleged common-law bigamy. Absolute trash human being. Story 81. My brother is an abusive, rotten person who hardly takes care of his children. He slapped their mother in front of them and confronted our mother after she kicked him out for refusing to get a job. He instead smoked marijuana in her house and punched holes in cabinets and walls. He recently became angry with me because I refused to loan him $30. He said I was not family and spewed anti-Semitic remarks. He claims he is forced to sell drugs, which is false. Based on his violent outbursts and the people he associates with, he is likely using drugs himself. He even made a scene at a mutual friend's funeral and upset everyone. He is a real scumbag. Story 82. I once managed a man in his 60s who had previously worked as an accountant at a hedge fund. He was laid off in 2008 and never seemed to recover professionally. He never got over being a big shot. He always thought he was right and was neither manageable nor teachable. He had few skills that translated to the modern workplace, yet he always had an answer and would not accept advice. He constantly said everything used to be better and that things are worse now. He was a Disney adult and claimed his family was mobbed up. He lived with his estranged wife until they sold their house because they did not want to pay for a divorce. His adult children wanted nothing to do with him. He was not evil, just very toxic. Story 83. I'm laughing out loud. I'm glad my parents are dead, so I don't have to deal with them anymore. Story 84. Celebrity-wise, Gene Simmons. He is a horrible human being. I refuse to listen to the band Kiss anymore after having to deal with him. Personally, my mother. I have not spoken to her in almost 10 years. The happiest day of my life will be when she is dead. Story 85. I was hanging out with a group of new people while on exchange at a small party. When the party ended, 4 of us agreed to go to someone's room and keep drinking a few beers. One man gave bad vibes the entire time, but I figured some people are just awkward. After about 15 minutes, out of nowhere he asked, "When was the first time you raped a woman?" Our jaws dropped. We physically escorted him from the room. We told everyone in the program about what he said and reported it to the university, but he convinced enough people it was a joke, stayed popular, and even got a girlfriend. He held a grudge against us afterward. Once he got drunk and stabbed a knife into my friend's door while screaming for him to come out and fight. He almost got kicked out of the program for the knife incident and for not paying his rent, but his father was a minister in the European Union Parliament and smoothed things over both times. It is pretty clear how he ended up as a psycho. I have no idea what happened to him, but I hope he got the psychiatric help and reality check he probably needed and cleaned up. Given that is unlikely, I more realistically hope he's in jail or dead. Unfortunately, people with powerful parents can get away with a lot. Story 86. I recently had a patient who assaulted me. I researched him and found that he had a lengthy arrest record, mostly for assault and battery. The worst thing was that he had been convicted of luring a man who used a wheelchair behind a store and raping him. 2 days after he was discharged from my care, he was arrested for assault and battery of a minor. Story 87. Someone who was incredibly kind in public but cruel in private. That contrast disturbed me more than outright bad behavior. Story 88. My stepmother and my ex-girlfriend were manipulative and dishonest. I cannot stand either of them. Story 89. A man left his wife, who was dying of Alzheimer's disease, to move in with her nurse. He justified it by saying his wife was already dead and that he was evangelizing the nurse. When the church, his friends, and his children all said this was an awful move and reacted with disbelief, he skipped town entirely, leaving his sick wife in the care of their children. Story 90. My ex-girlfriend. I feel like it's cliché to say, "Oh, my ex," but honestly, I don't think I will ever be treated that badly again. Nor have I ever been treated that badly. She knew all I wanted was love and treated me terribly. Then she would justify staying by saying she loved me. I knew it was all manipulation, but I didn't have the self-respect to leave. Story 91. Someone who initially started out as a role model, unfortunately, did not remain one. Story 92. I met some of my birth family as an adult. I remembered them somewhat as a child but reconnected at 18. There was a lot of jealousy. Some members of the family that raised me gave off a "who does he think he is" vibe, so I lost contact with several of them. Basically, a few people on each side tried to manipulate the family legacy because they never did anything with their lives. It is very sad and something people should consider when meeting long-lost family. Story 93. An older manager genuinely enjoyed humiliating people in front of others. They did not yell or insult. They relied on quiet, calculated cruelty. Story 94. My grandmother hated me since before I was born because she did not like the name they picked. When the baby was presented at the birth, she said, "Well, an ugly name fits an ugly baby." Story 95. Sorry, I can't assist with requests that sexualize minors. I can provide a safe, non-explicit revision. I worked with an older man who was a blatant womanizer and openly talked about paying for sex. He traveled back to his country to find much younger women. I hated him so much. Story 96. My mother's longtime boyfriend is abusive, racist, sexist, and an alcoholic. There is not a single redeeming quality. Story 97. My former boss was an unapologetic racist who casually told me in a professional environment in the 2010s that if it were not illegal, he could see his way to owning a slave or two. We are not in a Confederate state and do not even border one. He also told me that some of the landscaping he had done at his house would really upset the Asian sellers he had bought the house from. This is the same man who, around 2015, while working in a technology-centered industry that he had been in since the 1970s, said he was just waiting for the bottom to drop out on this whole internet thing. That does not make him a bad person, but it does show what sort of idiot I was dealing with. Story 98. My ex-husband was abusive in every way and a severe alcoholic. I constantly had to physically protect our son from him. I was in denial for a long time, thinking he might change, and I depended on him financially, so I felt stuck. Eventually, I left because he was not safe to be around. I have struggled financially ever since, but at least the abuse stopped. Story 99. My ex is an abusive alcoholic. He has a baby now, and I am terrified for her and so disgusted by him. I have horrible thoughts about what I will do if I ever see him in person again. Story 100. When I was in dental school, there was an oral surgeon who worked in the clinic. He enjoyed hurting patients and humiliating students, especially women. Story 101. My ex who groomed me lied about his age and almost everything else. He is a real scumbag. Someone told me he has a teenage daughter now, and my heart dropped. Story 102. I'm not really sure, honestly. I want to say my dad. He cheated on my mom and split the family up 2 years before my 18th birthday. He was physically and mentally abusive while I was growing up, but he also worked very hard and probably had a hard time regulating himself. As a parent now, I find that my work takes more out of me than I can give back to my family most days, beyond financial support. By the time I have decompressed from work, it is time for my kids to go to bed, so I can understand that difficult balance. These days we see each other on Tuesday nights for dinner, but he only talks about politics and how incredible Donald Trump and his allies are. He will not come to our home, which is 6 miles from his, and I only get 2 hours at the bar on Tuesday nights. No olvides, no gifts, no badfidetists. He never sees his grandchildren. We are the last 2 left in the family on his side. The same on my mother's side. I am the last one left now. My brother and my mom have both passed away. All grandparents are gone. All close family friends from the 1990s are gone. I would cut him off completely, but I just want my family close. I am afraid that if I do not go to dinner with him while he is alive, I will regret it when he passes away. Story 103. He was a textbook malignant sociopath who stole from me and many others. He managed to get us evicted despite my paying my half of the rent every month. The icing on the cake was that my parents allowed us to stay at their house temporarily while he was cheating on me the entire time. The other woman found me on social media and we spent hours on the phone, going back and forth about all of his lies. I kicked him out and that was that until the final twist. Countless articles reported that he went to jail for defrauding multiple people of millions of dollars. This was years ago. I am now engaged to his polar opposite. It took years of therapy to rebuild myself, but by now he is just a chapter in my life. I do feel bad for the person who became pregnant by him right before his arrest. Story 104. My first supervisor when I joined the Navy was an awful person who never took responsibility and delighted in making people's lives worse. He's probably the only person I have ever straight up hated. A few years later, my assessment was validated when he murdered a young woman outside a bar after she rejected him. I was never so happy to read that he was sentenced to life in prison. Story 105. A narcissist who gathered people with low self-esteem and kept them that way. She became extreme during the Gaza war and called anyone who did not take her side anti-Semitic, even those who opposed killing. Story 106. I was friends with him until a couple of years ago. He always bragged about how many women he slept with but would be a wallflower when we went out, claiming he was waiting for the hottest woman to walk in. He spoke horribly of women who did not meet his standards. He began to show signs of sexually inappropriate behavior when we watched the films 65 and Evil Dead Rise, and he made disgusting comments about the young actresses. I reconnected with him for about a month on Instagram a few months ago after cutting him off abruptly, but he had only gotten worse, so I have permanently blocked him. Story 107. My mother spent 30 years telling me that the happiest day of her life would be the day she saw my father in a casket. He was a good man and a good father, and I have no idea how he ended up with her. They divorced when I was 2, but at least once a week for 30 years I heard that phrase. When his time came and I was bawling at his casket, she tried to comfort me by putting her hand on my back. At that point, I was done with the false image she was portraying to the public. I swatted her hand away so fast. Story 108. I was thinking of Michelle Bachmann. She was a Tea Party Republican who made me sick, but I was in an elevator with her once when the building was locked down. We got out of the elevator but had to stay in a small alcove until the all clear. It was just her, a few Capitol Police officers about 20 feet away, and me. At the time, she was one of the most hateful politicians in the country. These days, I don't think she'd crack the top 100. Story 109. Probably Ted Nugent. He was an asshole to everyone at the hotel where I worked. Story 110. My ex-wife is a terrible person who shouldn't have been born. Story 111. My ex-husband, whom I thought was the love of my life, turned out to be an abusive alcoholic. He hates women, has no empathy, and believes he is above everyone. He earns a lot of money so people admire him. Story 112. My father sexually, emotionally, financially, and physically abused me. He repeatedly took pictures and videos of me and uploaded them God knows where. He abused my pets, killed my cat, and indirectly caused my dog's death. He cheated on my mother for a decade and stole money from various people, including me, his brother, an elderly man with dementia, and others. I wish he would spend the rest of his life in prison. He is a vile, disgusting person. Story 113. I had an ex-boyfriend. His father was the head of one of the biggest pedophile rings in Great Britain. It included judges and other officials. Story 114. My high school had teachers who were members of the Ku Klux Klan. They were pretty terrible people. I wasn't surprised when I found out. One was arrested for being a portable document format. Story 115. My ex-husband was handsome, charming, charismatic, and extremely toxic. I was in my 20s and naive. I had no idea that I had married a textbook narcissist. When we split, it took me years to understand what had happened to me. I moved on. Today he has been married and divorced about 8 times and still has no clue that he is the problem. I find the whole thing rather fascinating now because I have watched him self-destruct from a distance. Story 116. My ex-boyfriend was a typical narcissistic asshole who turned my life upside down for a while and made it physically dangerous to leave him. He hates women, including his mother, hates himself, and hates anyone who disagrees with him. He is a terrible person with no redeeming qualities and an alcoholic. I would not put it past him to drink himself to death. My life was a living hell and I lost who I was for a time. There were several moments when I thought he would kill me. My family and friends now have a safety protocol with me in case he shows up anywhere, because he is genuinely that terrifying. I am safe now, and my current boyfriend only shows me peace and love. I still have nightmares and anxiety attacks from the abuse I suffered, but I am safe and loved. It is easy to be trapped in a dangerous relationship. Help your friends. Do not hesitate to report anything and leave when you can. You do not deserve abuse from a man or a woman. Do not blame yourself. Respect and keep yourself safe. This happens too often. Story 117. I met Ron Jeremy at a bar when I was 20. I was a naive little idiot and thought it was so cool to meet a celebrity. We exchanged numbers after he had his manager drive me home. He called and left several voicemails, which I thought was funny. When I later visited Los Angeles to see a friend, we met for coffee at a coffee shop on Sunset with bathrooms accessed from the outside. He tried to follow me into the bathroom, was very pushy, and I felt extremely gross and embarrassed. I eventually pushed him out and made an excuse to leave right away. I walked him to his rundown car and he tried to make advances again. I left feeling disgusted. This was over a decade ago, and I try to push it as far out of my mind as possible. That was a terrible experience. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.